So a little bit about David, whom some of you know from either tennis or many other ways that David knows people. After earlier stints at the pre-Murdoch New York Post, the Daily Journal of Elizabeth, New Jersey, and UPI, David joined Newsweek in 1966. At the magazine, David worked mostly in the national affairs and international sections, but also coordinated the Newsweek poll of public opinion in the US and abroad. In 1982, he launched Newsweek On Air, the weekly hour-long network radio broadcast. Later, also a podcast was heard across the country and around the world via Armed Forces Radio. It featured interviews with Newsweek staffers and newsmakers who they wrote about. 30 years later, as Newsweek hit hard times, Alpern took the show independent and nonprofit as for your ears only. Its first funding came from the National Arts Club in Manhattan, and subsequent foundation support and listener donations continued until 2014, when the nonprofit Internet Archive agreed to post past shows back to 1982, and that includes more than 15,000 interviews. Now, David has been a full-time resident of Sag Harbor for quite some time. He writes book reviews for the East Hampton Star. He also moderates John Germain Library's national affairs programs, and he plays a mean game of tennis. So, welcome, David. We'll let you go ahead and get started, and thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks, Penny. And,
now, David, I just want to make sure everyone's muted because I hear I heard something that made me wonder if everyone was muted, and I'll go ahead and mute myself too.
Okay, thanks, Penny. Thanks to all out in Zoom Hampton and beyond. Please forgive any delays or adjustments in volume you may have to make. My laptop chose this morning to die, so we come to you courtesy of my wife's laptop and the incredible technical skills of Joanna Ferron of the library. If you attended last summer's presentation of clips from my old radio shows, which is still posted on the library YouTube page, you may recall that besides the likes of Katharine Hepburn, Katharine Graham, Robert McNamara, John le Carré, and such, there were quite a few folks who lived, summered, or regularly visited us here in the Hamptons. They included Bob Caro, Carl Bernstein, his former wife Nora Ephron, Tom Wolfe, and the novelist, critic, and music historian Wilfred Sheed. That they all had a Hampton connection was not quite coincidental. I knew some of them personally, or knew how to get to them when they were in the news, or more important, in Newsweek. And it led me to think that this year's dive into the audio archive should focus solely on guests with a Hampton connection. So today we have Betty Friedan, E.L. Doctorow, Kurt Vonnegut, Lally Weymouth, Dick Cavett, Julie Andrews, legendary Broadway composer Cy Coleman, and one of his last collaborators, my late lyricist pal, Ira Gasman. Yes, also new clips from Bernstein and Caro, but this time also Bob's wife, Ina Caro, on one of her own books. And this time, if all goes well, we also have their pictures. No need to look at me, but you can. Let's start with Friedan, the feminist icon whose first invitation to one of her Sag Harbor dinners quite surprised me, as did the manner of it. Betty interrupted a conversation I was having with another woman, to whom she turned her back and loudly asked only me. As many knew, and I learned, she was defiant on behalf of womankind, but to any particular woman at times could be rather rude. For the radio, we spoke to her long distance from a women's conference in Africa.
Sorry.
Well, you know, this has been the most fabulous conference, the non-governmental, the voluntary organization conference here in Nairobi. I think it is historic. I think it is the worldwide explosion of the women's movement. It is, I was dreading it because I had been at both Mexico and Copenhagen, and in both of those conferences, there had been a complete diversion and manipulation from the male political agenda, and the women had barely been able to get together and start some networking, and it had been almost a token vow. But it still had done some good. But this time, first of all, nearly 14,000 women came, over 14,000, and they had to have their organizations raise the money. They had to save their own money. They had to do big sales. And they got here for the most incredible places, taking 2 and 3 days to get here. And then there was such clear evidence of how much women have moved in their consciousness and their strength and their effectiveness. Certainly the economic problems are overwhelming in the situation of women in the U.S., even though in the U.S. we have feminization of poverty too. But it isn't the same as the Kenyan women whose villages I visited today, and who are trying to somehow get get development, which they badly need, dealing with their problems of carrying water and firewood and getting a share and doing something about when their husbands, change to cash crops and don't give them any of the cash instead of raising the food that they need to live on. So these problems are different economic problems. But, you are talking in the abstract when you say how difficult it was for women to get together. Here, it was not difficult for women to get together. You had Egyptian women sat under my tree. How does one move out of the veil or not say that you don't want your husband to take 3 more wives, or that you don't want your daughter to have female clitorectomy, when the whole society, the tradition of the society, suppresses you and says that you should be subservient and you would be ostracized as a woman? I don't think a Western woman can give you the answer to that. And I would ask the other women from countries with similar rigid traditions to do it there. But they just kept turning, doesn't it? I'd say all I can say is you just can't move all alone. And it was that kind of sharing that we did with each other. And I think the most amazing things are going to happen as a result of this. I was visiting a Kenyan village today, and a woman had just been elected for the first time, head of the water committee. And the women are the ones that carry the water. And they'd gotten a pump that was that they wouldn't have to go up and down this steep hill. That pump kept getting broken. But the men, as long as the men headed the water committee, they didn't care that much. It wasn't their priority because it was women that had to do this backbreaking job. Well, this has been the most fabulous conference that
Across the waters of Upper Sag Harbor Cove from Betty's house lived a Doctorow, with whom I played twice once, and who for years after called me the most improved player in our little Sag club, clearly kind of flattery or irony or both. Based on a feature in Newsweek, he talked about what led him to writing and to such brilliant novels as Ragtime, The Book of Daniel, Billy Bathgate, and March. You may have to turn up your volume.
Oh, I think I was about 9 years old. I've been reading a lot and wondering how all those wonderful adventures were composed. And so I decided I was a writer as well. Of course, I didn't have to write anything or feel necessary to write anything for many years. I was encouraged by my teachers whenever I turned in a book report or something of that sort. It was very helpful to me. Most of my books begin with strange evocative feelings based on an image I see or sound of some words or even a phrase of music. And I start writing and discovering as I go along what it is I'm doing. You write to find out what you're writing. And so as you go along, you develop some sort of text, then you get what you need just out of the air. And perhaps you look something up to confirm what your imagination has told you. But what I do, I don't dignify with the word research. It's too idiosyncratic, too subjective. And if someone asks me how much research I do, I say just enough. Someone might believe I'm an historical novelist. Someone else might think I'm a New York novelist or a postmodern novelist, or that I write out of different genres, or that I'm a political novelist. So in those terms, I pretty well covered. Sometimes people ask questions and mean well, but they don't understand how rude the question is. For instance, someone will say, Mr. Doctorow, what was your purpose in writing this novel? And there's really no answer to that except to say my purpose was to finish writing the novel. When something's created or adapted from your work, it's never it's never completely satisfying. And the 5 films that have been made for my work, it's only one, the Daniel film, that I think has anything at all. It's not a completely successful film, but there's some really stunning things in it. The musical version of Ragtime is rather good, I think. It's not quite the novel. The novel is a little more ironic, impudent, and satirical than the show is, but they have stuck to the basic structure of the thing, and they've done some wonderful music and lyrics. So it's not my novel, but it's a pretty good stage show.
Another great novelist in the neighborhood was Vonnegut, author of The Sirens of Titan, Mother Night, Cat's Cradle, Breakfast of Champions, God Bless You, Mrs. Rosewater, and of course, Slaughterhouse-Five. In 1997, we asked why he said his latest novel, Timequake, would be his last.
Well, is I think most insurance actuaries would say it's probably my last, is I'll be 75 on November 11th. And also, I'm completely in print. So there's plenty of my talk available at the nearest bus station. And it's an Adam Smith market. It's a completely market-driven phenomenon. And so, yes, most of my books were never reviewed as they were considered, as that genre for teenagers. Well, they're all much better than Newsweek realized until this very moment. This is a very strange book, and we call it a novel just to find a niche for it in a bookstore. But it is very self-indulgent, but I hope funny and interesting. No, I just want him to laugh. No, I do have a message, really. It is what Samuel Goldwyn said, if you got a message, send a telegram. But what I say, I'm going to lecture next week at South Carolina, University of South Carolina, and I'm going to say what I say in all my lectures, is you need an extended family. We all do. And to do without one is like doing without an essential mineral or vitamin. We are too damn lonesome.
In fact, Timequake was Vonnegut's last novel, though he lived 10 more years and never stopped writing and publishing in other genres. Lally Weymouth and I have only 2 things in common, really. We both worked for her mother, Kay Graham, at Newsweek, and we both had to cancel annual parties this summer because of COVID-19. She disappointed a far larger, richer crowd. As Newsweek colleagues, we spoke frequently on the radio show when she came back from one of her exotic overseas interviews with foreign leaders, as in this 2003 conversation about Muammar Gaddafi of Libya.
He met me in a tent in this big compound that he has, which is near, in the same compound as the home that was destroyed. He revealed, which I thought was very interesting, considering he used to be known as, the greatest terrorist in the world, that today he's giving information to the United States about Al-Qaeda to help us fight Al-Qaeda, because he regards Al-Qaeda as a member of, as an enemy of his too. He said that Al-Qaeda was a danger to his regime, and he regards him as a dangerous guy, and fundamentalism as a danger too. But he was concerned that the United States had, in some ways, strengthened bin Laden, he said, by declaring war against Iraq. He said that bin Laden had told his followers that, after all, America's not out just to get you in Afghanistan, it's out to conquer the whole world. And he said now bin Laden could point to the proposed Iraq invasion and say, see, I was right. I said to him, so you're said to have backed off your previous support for terrorism, which U.S. officials say he has. He backed every terror group in the world, I would say. And I asked him, was it Reagan's raid in 1986 when Reagan dropped a bomb on his home and actually the United States tried to kill him? Or was it sanctions that were imposed by both the United States and the United Nations? What was it? What made you change? And he really wouldn't answer the question. He wouldn't say, I changed because of sanctions or I changed because of this. But he did imply that, yes, he no longer backed wars of liberation the way he formerly had, as he calls them, wars of liberation, which, of course, is a synonym for terrorist groups. I think that he's an interesting lesson because he could be one thing we haven't talked about that's one of the United States and Great Britain's prime concerns, and that he denied when I asked him about it, is stockpiling of chemical weapons in Libya. I told him that Aric Sharon, Prime Minister Sharon of Israel, had said that Libya was most likely of all the Arab states to get a nuclear weapon first, and he denied it. But the United States has major concerns about Libya stockpiling chemical and biological and I believe even nuclear weapons. And although he denied it, and he did little to actually assuage those fears, which I would say are the key fears today about Libya.
It turned out that Gaddafi had exchanged nuclear research with Pakistan in the 1970s, then sought better relations with the West in 2003, later decommissioning his chemical and nuclear weapons programs. But he was overthrown and killed after the U.S. joined escalating NATO air operations that were first meant only to prevent humanitarian crimes in rebel-held territory during a spreading civil war. The lesson that may well have been taken by North Korea, Iran, and other nuclear weapons wannabes is clear. Don't give up or give up on the bomb. Next, we have Dick Cavett, formerly of Montauk. I didn't actually meet him until years after our phone conversation for radio, when a friend brought him and his wife to lunch. But it was fun, even remotely, to turn the tables on that great interviewer and learn that he did not really pal around much with his guests either.
That's what I used to think. I used to think, I bet all those people go out to the nearest establishment and chat the evening away. And the fact is, you hardly ever see most of the people again. People think Catherine Hepburn and I probably hang out all the time. And you wish you could.
We asked what was behind the explosion of new talk shows on TV.
I don't know. What if all of television gets laryngitis? It'd really be something, wouldn't it? I don't know. I met a woman from New Jersey who doesn't have a talk show, and I didn't catch her name. She must be about the only one. I asked somebody wise in the business, and I said, why are there so many? And he said, they're cheap. Money is usually the explanation of most things in television, or most things. But I don't know that the public has been asked if they have an appetite for that much talk, and I think most people boil down to the show they like to watch. The assumption seems to be that everybody watches all of them, which of course they don't. So we're back in another overcrowded situation. Show gridlock on the air.
We asked whom he targets as his TV audience.
I don't really design it with the viewer in mind, and I meet all kinds of people who say they see the show from in every level. You know, cab drivers watch it, and professor at Columbia watches it. And I met another professor at Columbia who said, I was a professor from Princeton, who said, when I go home, I don't want thoughts. I want to watch Lucy and forget my troubles. I think it's a mistake to have a target viewer in mind. I think you sort of do what appeals to you and hope that some people share your taste.
Did he have a favorite among other talk shows? And how did he prepare for his own?
I don't really. I don't watch much TV. It sounds kind of silly, but it's gotten so I don't associate TV with entertainment that much anymore. Well, I had a tendency always to do too much preparation and then sit there with my mind jamming, thinking of the 83 things I'm never going to get to, and then noticing that the guests' lips had stopped moving and I hadn't listened to what they'd been saying. It was my turn to talk. I think it's better to treat it as a conversation. If it's a subject like somebody who's coming on to talk about her secret revolution in a Latin American country or something. You want to do a little research to know what they're talking about. But if it's a great dancer or actor or politician that you're familiar with, something like that, you can pretty much trust to wing it. But even so, I find that even Johnny, after all these years, likes to have notes in front of him. It's a kind of security in case one of you goes blank. But when I've gone on Johnny's show, a lot of times, they'll make notes and so on, and then he and I start chatting, and we never get to any of them.
We asked if it's important that a guest seems to be your friend, or is there more appeal to be meeting for the first time?
There is. Mailer hosted Griffin once, and he wanted Orson Welles, and they both made a point of not meeting until on camera. But I often go on and say hello at least, partly because I'm usually not ready till airtime. Find a way of overcoming nerves early is to keep busy right up till the last moment. And sometimes they want a little reassurance, just having met you before, getting used to looking at you and so on. In England, they have another system. They get everybody drunk.
Now, as promised, a Carol encore. Easily done, as Bob talked on our show at least half a dozen times on different aspects of his double Pulitzer work on politics and power, specifically biographies of New York master builder Robert Moses and Great Society architect Lyndon Johnson. In this case, the subject was the second of 4 published LBJ volumes, Means of Ascent, including LBJ's stolen election to the U.S. Senate in 1948, originally meant only to be a chapter. So why the expansion?
I began to realize, the more I looked into this election, that if I showed it in detail, I could show a lot of things that I've been wanting to demonstrate about American politics, the whole transformation of American politics in the 20th century. Because one of the candidates, Coke Stevenson, was the old politics, the campaigner driving around Texas by himself, only with a driver in the car, and speaking in each little town to a small group of people on the courthouse lawn or on Main Street. Johnson was the new politics. This was the first campaign of the true media politics in Texas. And of course, with the new politics, he overwhelmed the old, and the old era in American politics ended.
But the fact is he would have lost without old-fashioned fraud. Doesn't that irony a little bit undermine the election's symbolic significance?
No, not really, because he was so far behind. He was running. The media politics brought him close enough to steal it.
Among LBJ's domestic achievements, of course, were the social and economic programs of the Great Society. But now some critics say they cost the nation more than they cut poverty, making big government itself a target for conservatives today. What's your view on that?
Well, as I said, there are two sides to Lyndon Johnson. I don't agree with that at all. I think that his achievements against poverty and against civil rights reshaped America. I mean, I wrote that Abraham Lincoln freed the slaves, freed black people. It was Lyndon Johnson who took their hand, led them into the voting booth, and made them part of American political life. His domestic record was as wonderful as Vietnam is controversial.
Well, you've said on this show and many other places, Johnson saying that about the Voting Rights Act later, that if African Americans got the vote, they could fight a wide range of other impediments themselves. How do you think he would react to the way state and local politics, and now even the Supreme Court, have reversed expansion of minority voting, limiting special hours, gerrymandering districts, weakening requirements for federal approval of voting law changes in those old bastions of discrimination?
Yeah, I think Lyndon Johnson, being Lyndon Johnson, would react in words that we couldn't print on this program.
Finally, as a scholar of power and politics, personally, what do you make of the Supreme Court's latest undermining of campaign finance reforms last week, removing overall limits on how much the rich and already powerful can donate?
I think the overall impact of that is so negative. To allow this almost unfettered, unlimited use of money in politics is the most serious and damaging thing to the democratic principles of America that has happened.
Bob can be forgiven for not imagining the stress on democracy we're living through today, both virulent partisan politics and a killer virus. The COVID crisis hasn't stopped his work on LBJ Volume 5. but it has at least delayed an annual trip to France, a country about which his wife Ina has written 2 terrific history and travel books on her own. On the radio show, we talked about the second, Paris to the Past, a love letter to historic sites visited on day trips by rail. We began with a trademark ballad by Josephine Baker, circa 1930, that could be Ina's anthem as well. I have 2 loves, my country and Paris.
Well, Bob and I, that's my husband, fell in love with Paris, and we simply didn't want to leave. But the French have this marvelous train system in which you can get just about anywhere within an hour or so. I decided I would arrange our trips starting with a place in the 12th century and travel to places century by century.
The shortest trip, 18 minutes from Paris, was to Saint-Denis and its magnificent Gothic cathedral, burial site of 43 French kings and 32 queens, and first example of religious architecture that placed primary importance on light as a symbol of divinity, as conceived by the abbot Suger.
He fell in love with stained glass, and he wanted to pierce the walls. The Romanesque churches previously had been short and the windows had been very small. And he fell in love with stained glass, which had been just used to decorate reliquaries and jewel boxes and things. But he thought he could use it for windows. So he pierced the walls of the church and created the first stained glass windows so that the jeweled light coming through would fall on his floors. And he also used the pointed arch, which had existed before, but he used it architecturally so that he could raise the ceiling high. So at Saint-Denis, you have the first place that had stained glass windows and the first place which the ceilings were raised so that you have this feeling of soaring to the heavens.
Longest trip by high-speed rail, was to La Rochelle, site of a starvation siege we might now call a crime against Renaissance humanity.
Was the last holdout of the Protestants or Huguenots, and Cardinal Richelieu surrounded the city with French troops and then built a dike so that no boats could get in or out of the harbor. The reason I chose La Rochelle is because I just fell in love with the city. I fell in love with sitting by the waterside, by the sea, and watching the fishermen bring the fish in to the restaurant, and then the same fish coming out and being put on my plate.
From Paris in the distant past, we move to politics in the present, or at least the present century, with Carl Bernstein on Hillary Clinton, whose 2007 biography he titled A Woman in Charge. As we spoke, Hillary had fallen behind Barack Obama for the Democratic presidential nomination, despite a surprise victory in the New Hampshire primary after her emotional appearance at a local diner. We examined her reversal of fortune.
She was on top. She was looking like the inevitable nominee. She was comfortable, and then as it became clear in November and December that she was in trouble, there was a real reversion to the Hillary Clinton of the White House years, both her and her campaign in the worst sense. As you see in my book, especially in the new afterword to the paperback, the Clintons have a real ability to appeal to the best and the worst in all of us, and the best and the worst in themselves, depending on their surroundings and conditions. And they're at their most unappealing but resourceful, no matter how much lip biting and choking up when their backs are to the wall. And I think that we need to look at what happened in that diner in a much bigger context of the whole campaign and its overall message, because there have been 3 great columns in the New York Times written by women this week, by Maureen Dowd, Judith Warner,
and then a third one by Gail Collins. And as Judith Warner said, how absurd, how depressing and disheartening and just plain dumb this whole business is, which is to say that we in the press have been focusing on this moment of supposed rare humanity, as Anna said. Hillary is a real person. I've written a whole book about Hillary, the real person. But out there campaigning, they have been running a campaign for restoration that really has been appealing not to the best side of the voters or the Clintons. Did she and her advisors discuss the need for her to show more emotion? Yes. Was there a discussion of projecting a shaky voice and tearing up? I doubt that anybody would dare say such a thing out loud. But the important thing, Maureen Dowd said it. She managed to stay on message through the whole episode, which helps. Look, I think I go back to those three columns that essentially seem to be saying, I would translate it as, if this is feminism, it sure harks back to feudalism. Somebody said to me on the last day of the Clinton presidency, who knows the Clintons very well, emotionally Bill is still the same guy who got off the boat after Oxford. Hillary evolves emotionally to some extent, and I don't think you would say the same about Bill. And what we are seeing is what we're getting in this restoration campaign, and that includes a lot of quick and loose and fast and dirty with the facts.
The sense of inevitability did little better for Hillary in 2016, of course, and by which time my radio show had ended, so I can't bring you any contemporaneous commentary on the combination of brickbats and bad campaign judgment that led to her winning 3 million more popular votes than Donald Trump, but losing key states and therefore the Electoral College. You all have your own views. Our next clip is a bit of a cheat, I admit. Julie Andrews had done a lovely interview with Newsweek magazine pegged to her recent memoir titled Home, focused on her childhood stardom in Great Britain and the necessary adjustments for adult roles on Broadway, specifically My Fair Lady, and not just learning Cockney so she could unlearn it on stage. Unfortunately, Andrews could not make time for a chat with Newsweek Radio, but there was an audiobook. And having reviewed the print version for the East Hampton Star, I knew just the parts I would have asked her about, beginning with director Moss Hart, a wise but tough taskmaster, especially over one long weekend.
There were moments when I became angry at him, hated him in fact. Then I became tearful from sheer frustration or despair. But I fought back the tears, and Moss would give me a little break, after which we would return and have at it again. By the end of the 48 hours, that good man had stripped my feelings bare and disposed of my girlish inadequacy. He had molded, kneaded, and helped me become the character of Eliza. He made her part of my soul. He later told me that he said to his wife, Kitty Carlisle, "You know, if this were the old days, I'd have taken her to the penthouse at the Plaza Hotel, locked the door, made passionate love to her all weekend, and she'd have emerged Monday morning a star." Kitty apparently replied, "Well, darling, we know we love each other. If you think it was really good, go ahead."
As her own celebrity grew, Andrews encountered stars ranging from Bing Crosby and Richard Burton to Cary Grant, Truman Capote, and Walt Disney, and she has a trunk full of delicious anecdotes, like this one about the sometimes flatulent Rex Harrison as Higgins.
On this particular evening, as I finished my speech, Rex released a veritable machine gun volley of pent-up wind. Members of the orchestra heard it. Every musician looked up to the stage in bewilderment. Even the first few rows of the audience heard it. There was a shocked silence, and at that precise moment, Kathleen Nesbitt, as Mrs. Higgins, had the line, "Henry, dear, please don't grind your teeth." It was outrageously funny. The orchestra roared with laughter. I could not look at Rex, and every single line I uttered in the scene after that had a double meaning. Higgins: "Eliza, you ungrateful wretch, you talk about me as if I were a motor bus." Eliza: "So you are a motor bus, all bounce and go and no consideration for anyone." By now, Rex had a devilish look on his face. Kathleen was trying to disguise her mirth, and, as usual, I was a basket case of giggles. Eliza's song, Without You, follows this dialogue, and I could see the lyrics coming at me before I sang them. No, my reverberating friend, you are not the beginning and the end. I took so many pauses in that scene trying to contain myself that the show ran over by about 10 minutes.
I was pleased last year when the Star asked me to review the second volume of Andrew's memoirs, Homework, which is equally star-studded, revealing, and fun, especially the part about pubic hair. Staying in the world of entertainment, we come to my best friend in Sag Harbor for 20 years before his untimely death, lyricist Ira Gasman, and Cy Coleman of Southampton, the iconic composer he enlisted or enticed into collaborating on a musical about pre-Disney Times Square, hustlers and hookers and pimps, the life, about which we talked as it opened on Broadway. First, a bit of a song that stopped the show every night, then Ira, Cy, and a little surprise to end our evening.
I'm getting too old for the oldest profession. I'm getting too tired and too slow.
A songwriter can spot a title, when he hears it or thinks it, and very often ideas came in the middle of a conversation or while walking down the street. The song Mr. Greed, for instance, which is about a three-card Monte dealer. That song came out of a conversation I had with a real three-card Monte dealer named Spanish Bobby. I remember taking him for a drink at the Sheraton Hotel on 7th Avenue, and we spent an hour talking about the psychology of these dealers and their customers, and how the whole thing works. And from that, came the really revelation that anyone who puts down $40 on a three-card Monte game is hoping to win 80 is looking to get something for nothing, and that's what drives him there. And maybe that's what makes it okay. If he loses his money, maybe he deserves to.
Kind of gambler whose luck is guaranteed. Thanks to my partner, Mr. Greed.
We asked Coleman if The Life was, in a way, an X-rated update of his earlier hit, Sweet Charity.
Not really, because there's a totally different approach to it. We did Sweet Charity in 1960s, and we couldn't do exactly the profession. For example, it was taken from the picture Nights of Cabiria, Fellini's film, and they were actually hookers in the Italian film, which was very charming. But we felt that it was a little too realistic in the 1960s to do it exactly that way. And so we made her a dance hall hostess, a little more of a fairy tale. This is a real drama. The Life is 1990s. It's a real drama of real people and a totally different approach.
Was it difficult writing Broadway musicals now that their style of song is no longer the mainstay of popular music?
Well, in a strange way, it's freeing, because what it is that you can write dramatically. In other words, you're not writing because I'm going to get that big hit pop tune. You hope you'll get one. But what it is you're writing more and more for the show, for the story. And, we would still like to have those pop tunes come out. As a matter of fact, I did an album where I had a lot of stars get together and introduce the music before the show came out, which is I did stars like Lou Rawls and Billy Preston, Liza Minnelli, and Jennifer Holliday, and even George Burns.
Easy, honey. Just give them what they came for. Easy, honey. Just smile and play the game for easy money. Don't let it in. Oh, that easy money is so easy to spend.
Thank you, George. The Life won 2 Tony Awards, and Ira lived to see the video from the London revival 20 years later. And that brings down the curtain on this show, though we may have a little time for questions. So wave your hands to be unmuted. Well, stunned silence.
Any questions? Just you can also write in the chat.
Now you can say hello. I unmuted.
Yes, we can hear you. So, hello. Is it Helen?
Yes.
All right.
Yes. Hello.
I'm here too.
Well,
does Helen Rattray have a question?
I only want to say hello and how nice it is to see a very old friend who's doing well and enjoying life and helping us enjoy it with him. Thank you.
Well, if that's me, thank you.
Yeah, that's you.
Hello, David.
Okay, Carl.
I don't know if I'm showing up, but
I don't think you're showing
it's
up.
all right.
Carl, try again to unmute yourself.
Unmute. David, a very unfair question. What was your, or has been, the favorite interview you've ever done out of the hundreds and hundreds you've done?
You missed last year's show when I answered that question at the very beginning with no insult to past guests, live or dead or in attendance. It was Katharine Hepburn.
Oh, really?
And if you go to the Rogers Memorial Library YouTube channel, you can hear it and all of the others, including earlier Bob Caro interviews, Kay Graham, lots of others. But I have to say that going to Katharine Graham's townhouse, I was at Kay Graham's townhouse once, but Katharine Hepburn's townhouse was extraordinary.
Okay, any more questions? Let's see.
I just want to say hello to Carl Grossman. Carl Grossman, can you hear Helen Rattray saying hello?
Yes, I can, all the way from the North Fork, Helen.
I know, it's terrible being over here. We have animals that they don't have on the South Fork. We have guinea fowl, and we have male guinea fowl that show all their feathers like turkeys. And I think if they let me out of this place, I'm going to import them to East Hampton and scare everybody in the village.
Well, I'm glad I could bring you two together. Anybody
Okay.
else? have any
I'd like to
questions,
just
comments?
make a comment. Well, I have actually two comments, and the first one is to thank Joanna, whom I didn't thank in the beginning, but Joanna worked for quite a long time with David, and they encountered some technical bad situations and fixed them, and Joanna is the person who made, coordinated the audio in this program, and it was a real feat, and she did a wonderful job. So thank you to Joanna. David, I have to say, I mean, yes, we have the past programs at the library. I would say the sound on these recordings is quite good here doing it via Zoom. But what I really want to say is thank you, because you have left a rich legacy of material for generations to listen to, enjoy, learn from, and have. So really our thanks to you, David, for all the great work you've done.
Well, it's my pleasure and delight that it's not gone and forgotten. In fact, anybody can go to the Internet Archive and browse through the whole collection going back to 1982. Just use the search function when you get to our little collection and type in any name or subject, and you'll get all of the shows that had that subject or that person in it. That's where all of these came from. And I'm sorry that in the many translations and copies that some of the volume was just a little too low. But maybe we can fix it up in the version that goes on the YouTube page. It's all pretty good stuff. I would ask Bob Caro if he has any thoughts about the assault on democracy that he has now seen since the time that we talked about the Supreme Court decision.
Well, just sadness, David. Just sadness, and a feeling of dread about what's going to happen.
You know, I hope that's a motivating force for many people to get out and make sure to vote. All right, I don't want to drag this on unnecessarily. If there are any more questions or comments,
I have one for you, David. This is Chris Corey. I don't know if I'm visible. Helen, am I?
No.
No, you're the invisible man.
All right. I just wonder, as a fellow veteran of the news magazines that once were so powerful, what your take is on the future of the Times and Newsweeks and U.S. News and Reports genre these days that you and I both have left behind.
Clearly, it is much diminished. There is still a Newsweek. I'm not sure that they still have a print edition. They did for a while. It was $5. As one of my former colleagues said, you know, it's still only a 25-cent magazine, whatever they charge for it. It's sad that the concept of the news magazine, which was taking a whole proliferation of coverage and reducing it to one or two or three narrative stories that made it all a lot easier than reading a week's worth of New York Times stories, at least 30% of which copied what was in the other New York Times story. You'd think that such a function would be more valuable in a time when there's such a proliferation of news. But clearly it's not happening, and it's very sad. But it was a thrill and a pleasure to be part of it back then and feel like you were really doing a service. So be it. Now, as we know, much of the media is entertainment driven for the clicks that it can get. And I'm always amazed that when I go through the stories on Google in the morning to catch up with what's going on in between real world crisis, there's something about some TV star or some soap opera thing. I mean, they're all just mashed together with no judgment. There was nothing, I have to admit my prejudice, like looking at the front page of the New York Times to get at least one view of the proportions that everything had relative to one another. It's hard to do that now in the sequential digital age.
I see we have Barbara Hoffman who has her hand up. Barbara?
Yeah.
Okay.
So, David, I have two comments. One, as everything you said, I always say ditto. So that simplifies it, except in tennis when I say Bryan Brothers. But the one comment that I would make is that, and I think everybody saw that, I sent a chat, which, you know, I only did because I'm not really familiar with Zoom and people do it. I think it's extraordinarily rude to do it in the middle of people's presentations, but people do it. But I was with Betty Friedan at the Nairobi Women's Conference in 1982, so I really appreciate it. Bella Abzug was there, all the people that we know from Women's League of Peace and Freedom. Cora was there, Cora Weiss. And it was very exciting. I mean, I was part of the group that started it with each of our organizations contributing $10. But what I think is interesting and what follows in all your interviews, and which is also a part of who you are, is that you're really interested in people, not in projecting yourself. And so the questions that you ask really lead people to capture that moment. Like Betty Friedan really, I believe, captured that spirit, but it was based on your questioning. And I think, I don't know all of the authors that you interviewed, some, but I think that the archive that you've created in part is due to what news really is all about. It's not about talking heads, just picking up what other people have done and talking into a microphone. It's people really doing basic research, investigating, and really wanting to hear what people have to say, to communicate it. And I think that's a special attribute that you have, that you've left us as part of your legacy. So I want to say thank you very much for you, for knowing you and everything else. So.
Well, thank you very much. I was always pleased by the way most guests really spoke, as Betty did, with the passion about why we had them on. I mean, the virtue of the radio show was that we didn't do it live in a studio. We did it by phone mostly, Katharine Hepburn to the contrary notwithstanding, which meant we could get to people wherever they were. We got to people who we know had something to say, and so they were passionate about what they were talking about. And I'm glad it certainly came through with Betty, and Doctorow's sort of satiric consciousness came through, and Vonnegut came through, and Julie Andrews came through. So I'm pleased with it, and I'm sorry for the technical difficulties. As I said, this morning at 7 in the morning, I went to book the tennis courts, and I found my laptop wasn't working. And I tried all day to get it going, but instead I borrowed my wife's, and we found how to get Zoom on it, my Zoom account. And Joanna did a great job in handling not only the procession of pictures, but the audio clips. So I think it was hopefully entertaining and informative, and brought some of those people back to us a little more closely. So I will leave it up to Penny. I want to say thanks to Penny and to Joanna Fallon of Rogers, all of you who zoomed in. I hope to see you with more captured voices, live or Zoom, next summer. Meantime, stay safe and well.
Great show. Great show.
Thank you.
Give up, David.
Bye, David. Thank you from all of us. Now we can all clap. We're unmuted. We will see you all again. We'll see the rest of you on September 9th, and we'll see David then.
They built the wall around your property yet?
Thank you again, David. This was wonderful.